TORTURE-1.
Well, the debate over the role that psychologists should play in military interrogations heated up this weekend at the annual convention of the American Psychological Association, or the APA. Over 100 people were at a rally Saturday urging the APA to explicitly ban its members from participating in interrogations of prisoners held in Guantanamo Bay, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the secret CIA black sites. After years of debate and numerous resignations from the association, APA members are now voting on a referendum that would make any participation in detainee interrogations a violation of their code of ethics. Dissident psychologist Stephen Reisner, a co-founder of the Coalition for an Ethical Psychology, is also one of the leading candidates for the APA presidency. He spoke at Saturday's rally in Boston.
Exists for one reason. It exists to prohibit psychologists' participation at sites by their very existence, which violate international law and human rights and perpetrate war crimes. The sites, let me give you an example. In the fall of 2002, the CIA were looking to capture Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, and when they went to where they thought he was, they found his two children there instead, two boys aged 7 and 9, whom they captured instead and brought them to a CIA black site where they were held, both at first to pressure their father to give up, to get information from them about his whereabouts, and later on, after he was captured, they kept them there to pressure their father into talking. When the people who were holding the children of Muhammad were asked about their care, they said they are being overseen by child psychologists. They are being given the best of care. When I hear that story, when I hear about psychologists participating in CIA black sites in the kidnapping of children, I know that something is wrong in the state of psychology and how psychology is being used. At this moment, there is no policy at the APA that prohibits psychologists from being present and behaving in that manner at CIA black sites, even though, and I have this on the word, I spoke to the UN Rapporteur on Torture from the UN Committee Against Torture, and I asked him whether participating in the operations, whether participating in what is taking place at CIA black sites where people are being disappeared, is that a war crime? And he said that is prosecutable as acquiescence to a war crime, and yet, to this day, that is not a violation of APA policy or ethics on psychologist behavior. This referendum has a clear intent, and it is to stop participation in war crimes and human rights violations in the name of national security and psychology around the world. Okay.
Psychologist Steve Reisner, running for presidency of the American Psychological Association. He was speaking at a rally outside the APA convention this weekend in Boston. This year's convention comes on the heels of a string of revelations that psychologists played a key role in designing the CIA's so-called enhanced interrogation techniques. Last week, lawyers for the Afghan Guantanamo prisoner Mohammed Jawad asserted that a psychologist had recommended a month-long isolation program that allegedly drove Jawad to attempt suicide. But the psychologist refused to testify, invoking the military equivalent of the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. Independent filmmaker and writer for The Nation, Ross Tuttle, asked APA Ethics Office Director Dr. Stephen Benke about the significance of this development.
There's been a report that has appeared that there was a psychologist who was involved in an abusive interrogation. I think we're deeply concerned about that. We've been very clear that the acts, as they have been reported on a blog, would be against our professional rules, and we'll take a very close look at that. We have jurisdiction only over our members, but whenever a psychologist is involved in any torture or abuse, that reflects on the entire profession.
Dr. Benke and the APA leadership are opposed to the referendum that has currently been put forward. We're joined now by two guests who support the referendum. Stephen Soltz is a faculty member at the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis, co-founder of the Coalition for Ethical Psychology. He blogs at psychoanalysts.opposewar.org/blog, and Brad Olson's a faculty member at Northwestern University, also a member of the Coalition for Ethical Psychology. They join us from Boston. We're also joined in Washington, D.C. by Leonard Rubenstein, who is the head of Physicians for Human Rights. I want to first go to Brad Olson. You're one of the authors of this referendum that the APA leadership has opposed that is now being voted on by the members of the American Psychological Association. Can you explain what it is?
Yes, the referendum is focused on the problem in Guantanamo Bay and the CIA black sites. I mean, these are settings that are against the law. I mean, they're extra legal, extra illegal. And what we're basically saying in this referendum, that psychologists should work in these settings, but psychologists should not work in these settings when they're working for the chain of command. We'd like to see psychologists from human rights organizations working with the International Committee of the Red Cross. So basically what the referendum is saying is that psychologists should work independently for the detainee or should not be at these settings at all.
If the referendum were passed, what direct effect would it have on the individual practices of these psychologists?
Well, the American Medical Association and the American Psychiatric Association, back prior to the American Psychological Association's policy, they made very similar policies that basically said physicians and psychiatrists should not play a role in these national security interrogations. And we had the Department of Defense say that they preferred psychologists in these behavioral science consultation roles. So what we're hoping to is we're hoping in 2008 to get back to where we should have been in 2005.
Leonard Rubenstein in Washington, D.C. with Physicians for Human Rights. The significance of this referendum in the broader picture in this country around the issue of torture.
Well, the referendum and the broad picture is really whether we're going to have psychologists and other health professionals participate in disorienting, breaking down, destroying detainees as part of the interrogation process. We know very clearly now from documents from the Pentagon that the behavior management plans at Guantanamo were designed to exploit and enhance disorientation and disorganization of the personality, and that was done through isolation and other means, and that psychologists were at the center of this. The problem is that it's not enough, as the APA has said, don't participate in torture, don't use these techniques. We've had a system in which the entire purpose of the system was to break people down. It's like telling people to go to a slaughterhouse and advise the people killing the animals and advise them not to hurt the animals. It's an impossible position to say you can participate so long as you don't harm when the entire system is designed to inflict harm.
What about the issue of the liability or the responsibility of psychologists in terms of the Geneva Conventions or internationally accepted rules of behavior for psychologists?
Well, the problem is that the structure and the system invited violations of all those standards, whether they were international ethical standards or international legal standards like the Geneva Conventions. And try as the association might to carve out a role that enables psychologists to participate without being engaged in the violations is an impossible task.
We're going to break, and when we come back, we will also be joined by a California state legislator, Mark Ridley Scott, who sponsored a resolution that just got passed by the California legislature that prohibits members of the health profession from participating in coercive interrogations. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. We'll be joined by all of our guests in just a minute.